Joining us now, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, and former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg. Also with us, president of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, Reverend Al Sharpton. He's with us as well. Lisa, we'll start with you. You were in the courtroom. Aside from the historic aspect of this event yesterday, if you could break down the major developments in the first day legally for us.
Mika, one of the biggest things that happened yesterday, and really truthfully, what consumed the most amount of time, was the pretrial motions that the parties wanted heard before Judge Merchan, and in particular, the DA's office asking for clarification with respect to a number of evidentiary rulings that Judge Merchan had made. In doing so and in asking for that clarity, they took us on a tour of their case. It was almost like a mini opening statement because we got a preview of all of the ways in which they are going to buttress the story that you and I and many viewers know so well, that Michael Cohen worked with Donald Trump to ensure that Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal's stories never saw the light of day before the 2016 election, and thereafter worked with Trump and Allen Weisselberg and others to paper it over in a way that we would never know that this is what they had done. But the DA's office yesterday was showing us how are they going to scaffold Michael Cohen as a witness? What are they going to build into that? And so we saw yesterday, for example, a preview of how they're going to use the National Enquirer witnesses. They said in 2015, there was a meeting at Trump Tower by which David Pecker made a promise to the Trump campaign. He was going to do three things. He's going to bury negative stories about Donald Trump, accentuate very positive stories about Donald Trump, and also say extraordinarily denigrating things about his enemies. And yesterday, the DA's office said, these are some headlines we want to introduce as evidence of this tripartite scheme. Things like that are how we saw the preview of the DA's case yesterday.
So, Chuck, Judge Merchan immediately ruled against recusing himself. That was pushed to the side, that motion, very quickly. So any other motions that stood out to you? And then after that, if you can just speak to the difficulty of picking this jury. If the lead question is, do you have any opinion about Donald Trump, arguably the most famous person in the country right now?
Let me take the second part, Willie, if I may. You're not looking for people who have no opinion, right? And I'll give you an example. We tried the 9/11 conspiracy in federal court in Alexandria, a few miles from the Pentagon. We weren't looking for people who never heard of 9/11. We weren't looking for people who were neutral on al-Qaeda, right? People had heard of 9/11 and they weren't neutral on al-Qaeda. We were looking for people who could say, despite all those things, I can listen to the evidence and be fair. That's all you're looking for. You can put aside what you know, what you believe, watch what's adduced at trial, follow the instructions of the judge, apply the law to the facts, and render a fair and impartial verdict. So I don't think it's that difficult to find a dozen people who can be fair. You may have to ask a lot of people until you find 12, but they'll get there. As for the judge's rulings not to recuse himself, that was easy. There was no basis for it. And I think Lisa very well summarized some of the other rulings yesterday, admitting evidence that the government's going to use at trial to sort of explain the context and the backdrop for why it was so important for the Trump campaign to try and kill this story right before the election.
But I think as one that knew Donald Trump, people forget, most of us at some point are motivated or try to use the influence of those that we looked up to, mentored us or whatever. He's on his Roy Cohen mentorship right now, which believe that you always look to find one or two of the jurors that can either hang the jury or get you an acquittal. This is why he's sitting there when he could stay awake, trying to stare at the jury. And he's trying to see at the prospective jurors, trying to see what kind of rhythm he could get with who may ultimately sit in that box. He's going to be playing Roy Cohen card all through the trial, trying to, use his facial expressions and other things to try to discredit without saying anything people like Michael Cohen and all. So, Chuck, my question to you is how do you counter that if you're the prosecutor? And how do you deal with the fact that you're dealing with a defendant who is trying to stay out of jail, who's hung around people like Roy Cohn all of his life, and is trying to play the jury as a defendant when he's not Sleepy Donald.
Well, right. So all defendants are trying to stay out of jail. So he's not unique in that way. But you raise a really interesting point, Reverend. It only takes one juror to hang the jury. And let me explain that. A jury has to be unanimous to convict, 12-0. It has to be unanimous to acquit, 12-0. But any other combination, 11-1, 10-2, means a mistrial. And for a defendant who's looking to run out the clock, right, having a mistrial would be a wonderful outcome for Mr. Trump. Not a conclusive outcome, but a wonderful outcome. It means that if there's another trial, it's months and months away, right, and he might be president again by then. So, you know, that is a hard task for a prosecutor, to eliminate from the jury pool anybody who has a hidden agenda. By definition, hidden agendas are hidden. And so the voir dire process is an attempt to try and pierce that veil, but it's not perfect. And while I believe, as I told Willie, that you can get a fair jury, it could be the case that somebody ends up on the jury who wants a particular outcome. You ought to try and avoid that as a prosecutor.
Yeah, and Gene, we obviously that's obviously what Donald Trump's hoping for. He only needs one juror who decides they're going to ignore the facts, they're going to ignore the evidence, they're going to ignore the law, and let Donald Trump walk.
Yeah, that's exactly what he wants, and he's going to try to, he and I guess his lawyers are going to try to engineer that. My question to Lisa, just in terms of inside the courtroom, aside from the interlude when he seemed to fall asleep, was Donald Trump really actively engaged? Did he seem to be actively engaged with his defense lawyers? How was that dynamic? Do you expect him to try to play a major role in this jury selection process in making those decisions? And from the point of view of his defense team, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think from the point of view of his defense team, look, Gene, nobody wants to be micromanaged by a client ever, particularly a client who maybe doesn't have the best judgment with respect to how he's perceived by others. But was he actively engaged? Yes. And I was particularly struck by I'll call it the friendship or the bromance between Todd Blanche and Donald Trump yesterday. There was frequent huddling, arms around each other, whispering, pointing, constant back and forth. And I will also tell you that Todd Blanche, who joined former President Trump's legal team about a year ago, seems unparalleled now in his closeness to former President Trump. He didn't enjoy that same rapport with two of the other attorneys sitting at the counsel table, Emil Bove, who was one of Blanche's partners and a former colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Susan Necheles, who was sitting at the far end of the table and is one of New York's best-known criminal defense lawyers. She's extraordinarily skilled, and yet doesn't seem to have that same relationship, that rapport that Todd Blanche and Donald Trump have clearly developed. And so I will be looking to that interplay. Who is leading who is the key question on my mind. Is Blanche able to get through to Trump and give him his best counsel? Or is this a situation of agency capture where, in effect, Trump's lawyers all become more Trumpy as a result of their association with him?
MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, thank you very much. We'll be seeing a lot of you, and we appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.